is Dave Reske, CEO of Nowspeed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of In the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths and misunderstandings of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Dave Kinnear. David has been a CEO, he's been a chairman of a company, he's also been a CEO coach and Vistage chair for 17 years. So I'm sure he's got some great stories to tell us today. So David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
And you have your own podcast as well, right? So this is probably natural territory for you.
Well, yes, a little video podcast. What I did was moved my normal blog post on my website from being just text to being both text and visual. So it works.
That's great. Well, it's fun to get content out there, text, visual, video, and I'm grateful that you took the time to have this conversation. So as you know, I like to start these conversations with what I call a mythbuster question. And one of the topics that you and I talked about was leadership and leading remote teams. So, in your experience with CEOs, what's something that most people believe about leading remote teams that's just not true?
Very interesting question. The less enlightened leaders that I work with, I'll put it that way, still believe in the old mantra that if I can't see you, you're not working. And that's never been true. That's always been a myth. If you stop and think about it, just because an employee is sitting at their desk, you really don't know what they're doing. And so I feel like, and what I encourage the people I coach to take on as an understanding that, look, this is an issue for you as a leader. Are you setting clear goals? Have you got a clear vision? And are you willing to accept that as long as you set a timeline for when you want product available from your employee, that they'll get it to you? So it doesn't matter whether you can see them or not. All you really want is to make sure if you need that report by close of business on Friday, you have it.
Yep. So it's about defining deliverables and results and having a process you trust. But let's take a little bit of a step back, because you and I have been doing this for some time by our age, which we won't disclose. But back in the day, we were all working in offices. And, if you were a manager, you could walk by somebody and it might look like they're working or not. And you could have a word with them if you felt like they needed that kind of instruction or feedback. So, what was it like? Think about back then. So was management better back then because people were able to just have those impromptu conversations and just kind of oversee and look over somebody's shoulder and say, hey, what's going on here? Was it easier or was it better to be a manager back in the day?
Well, I think it was more comfortable. And the reason I say that is, we're human beings. And so we really like having our interaction with people, and it just makes us feel more comfortable that we're in touch. But the reality of whether or not we were better managers, it has nothing to do with whether the employee was in the office. It has to do with was I being clear in setting my goals and expectations? And if I had done that and held you accountable, whether it was in person or over the phone, if you were traveling, didn't matter. If I was holding you accountable, then I was being a good leader at that point. So I don't see that really changing very much with remote workers. And I think we have to remember that, at least in the beginning, it kind of tailed off a little bit and leveled out. But in the beginning of the shutdown with COVID, our productivity went way up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we saw that. So my firm, we're a digital ad agency, and we went completely remote at that point, like everybody else, but we never looked back. So we shut down the office and we're just 100% remote now. We got employees now across the US and across Canada. And so we're living in that world all the time. But, it's interesting right now, like post-COVID, we see very vocal leaders like Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk coming out and saying, no, that was then, this is now, everybody back to the office. And so is there kind of a backlash or a trend of, leaders saying you got to get back to the office now? And do you think if that is happening, and maybe it's just a couple of isolated incidents, but they're very prominent, do you think that's a good thing that people are being called back into the office and moved away from remote work?
Well, it could be a good thing depending on your company, David. If you think about it, I don't want to create a sense of have and have not employees, right? So if I'm running a big manufacturing company and I have to have people in on the production line, let's face it, you can't run your CNC machine from home. You've got to be at the factory, and you've got to be watching the machine and what's going on. So I've got to have my manufacturing people there. And if I have them there, then tell the office people they can work from home. I'm creating this perception that there's a unique group of people that have a privilege that the production workers don't have. And so if you're in that kind of a situation, I can totally understand saying, hey, I want everybody back in the office. But if you're running a company that is a knowledge worker based company where your employees can do their work at home, then why would you not want to do what you did, for example, and either downsize your office space or eliminate it completely and have everybody work from home, just like you did? To my way of thinking, that's the smart move. Even if you need to have some office space, downsize it and make it like a hoteling situation where, hey, I want everybody in on either Tuesday or Thursday or Tuesday and Thursday, so we can have some in-face meetings where we can have the creativity work, but you don't need to be here every single day.
Yeah, and a lot of companies have done that. Let me just key on something you just said there and ask you to talk a little bit more about it. You said that it's the smart move, and I believe it's a smart move. A lot of companies believe it's a smart move, but tell me more about why you think that we, as a society, and why employees believe that that's the smart move where it can. What are the biggest benefits for employees and employers from letting people work remotely?
Well, for the employees, they've made it pretty obvious what they believe are the advantages. And for them, it's the flexibility of being home so I can stop at 10 o'clock in the morning and pay attention to my child and take them where they need to go if it's summertime. And at the same time, I can decide that, hey, I'm most productive in the morning. And so I want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I want to work until 10 or 11 o'clock, take a break, maybe finish up the day early. And I want to stop work at 4 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon. But I've put in a 10-hour day. So, and it's my call. But I can't do that if I'm required to be in the office. Excuse me, not very easily anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the employee gets a lot of flexibility. One of the things that I think about in work is also just the commute. I mean, back in the day, how many thousands of hours did we all spend just commuting, to get to that place? And now it seems insane to me that I would spend 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week, just driving back and forth when I could just be instantly productive at, 8:59 and beyond and be working. So there's definitely the flexibility and the commuting advantages and all that for the employee. What about for the employer? Does the employer get advantages as well from remote work?
I believe the productivity goes up. I believe that I get more, let's call it just plain long everyday tactical work done when my employees are more comfortable. They can work at their own pace. They can work at home. And in today's world, I get to retain my employees. Whereas if I'm insisting that they be in the office, I believe many employees now we may be going into a period of time where this is going to be a little less true, but up until now, employees, they have all the cards in their hand. They can change jobs very easily because they don't even have to change their so-called commute. They're working from home. So, and we've been at full employment essentially for a long time now. So if some of the predictions are true and we're going to see a little softening in the economy, we may see employees be back in not the driver's seat, but the employers being able to call the shots a little bit more like they used to. And so that may be an issue going forward. But I don't see the employer ever wanting to go back to completely controlling the time of their employees. It's not as productive.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. One of the other advantages that we've seen in working remotely is just the ability to hire people from everywhere. Yep. So, 3 years ago, our entire workforce was in one little town in Massachusetts. And now we're in, I think, 8 states and 3 provinces in Canada, which creates an administrative nightmare, by the way. That's a different political issue that I would love to have somebody fix. Because why do you have to incorporate, if you're working in Massachusetts, now you're going to incorporate because you have one employee in Georgia, separate taxes. Oh, it's a mess. But anyway, we managed through that. But we get to be able to hire better people all over the country. And as long as we manage the time zones and that gives them more flexibility. So I think that's definitely an advantage. And I think that works. That's a maybe a two-edged sword for the employee because they get to work anywhere as well. But they're also now competing. We're all competing with people, the best people all over the country, or maybe all over, right?
Oh, totally true. Yeah, the competition from the employee point of view, if they happen to be a really good knowledge worker with some kind of unique service that they provide, they're in a catbird seat at that point. On the other hand, they're competing with someone else who may actually have more experience than they have and perhaps a little sharper edge on the saw for some reason. And now they have to compete with that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a dual-edged sword because we're all able to hire. For me as an employer, hey, I can hire the best. I don't care where they are, as long as I'm willing to accept remote work. The big advantage for me is I used to have to, when eons ago, when I was hiring salespeople, I would either have to hire them in the region I wanted them to be, or if I needed them at the home office, I would have to pay to move that employee across the country or across state lines, and then pay the difference because if we were in California, where cost of living is a lot higher, I would have to bring people in and pay them the going rate in California and pay to move them. Well, now that's not so much. I can say, no, you live in the middle of the country, Ohio, and the cost of living out there is really a lot less than it is here in Southern California. So I'm not going to pay you the wages I would pay out here. I'm going to pay you Ohio wages. I'll pay you competitive, maybe slightly above market, because maybe that's the kind of company we are. But there's a ton of advantages to being able to hire people anywhere I want to hire them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think about our experience over the last few years. I think we've done that well in many cases, but in some cases they were not great hires. And so we had to unwind those.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that, we experience is sometimes it took us longer to figure that out, maybe, and we blame that on remote work. Did we just do it badly? Is it harder to figure out if people are really doing the job, especially with new employees, training, onboarding, when they're remote? Or is it really just, if you put the right process and systems in place, you can get the same onboarding experience, training experience, monitoring experience, from what you've seen?
From what I've seen, it's not any harder. It really isn't. Um, I now have to be a better manager in the sense that I have to be clear and understanding what your work capacity is so that I know how well to load up your so-called 40-hour week to make sure that you have enough work, that I'm not paying you to sit around and watch TV. I'm paying you to work. And so I need to make sure I understand your capacity, just like I would have to do that if you were in the office. You know, if I can see you sitting there twiddling your thumbs, if you're dumb enough to put your feet up on the desk and sit there obviously doing nothing, yeah, then I can see that's the case. And I can say, okay, what's the matter, Dave? Don't you have enough work to do? Yeah, boss, you didn't give me enough work to do. Well, I don't think Dave would last very long in the companies I ran if that were the case. I wanted people that said, knocked on my office door and said, hey, boss, I'm out of work. You need to give me something else to do. I'm bored sitting here.
It's funny you say that because the irony. So, in the ad agency world, sometimes we have not enough work and we have somebody on the bench. If I had to have that person come into the office and do 20 hours of work in a 40-hour week and just sit there idly for 20 hours, that's hard on me. It's awkward for the rest of the team. Everybody else is working hard. Yeah, I don't have enough work for you right now. It's way easier having them at home where they can go for a walk or watch TV. I don't really care. I've only given you 20 hours of work. It's better that I don't have to see you like playing cards in the break room or disturbing other people. I don't know. It's almost
right.
If you don't have enough work, it's better stay at home.
Yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't thought too deeply about. It's come up a couple times, but then again, it's like, okay, shame on me as a manager because I didn't give you enough work. If I have work, I could move some work from the other people, give them a little bit of a break and load you up so that you have at least 30 or 35 hours worth of work. Shame on me as a manager, but I would have had that same problem if you were in the office, except to your point, I can't see that you aren't busy. And so if I've made the right hire, I'm still going to jump on Teams or jump on Zoom or jump on whatever it is we use for our team to communicate and say, yeah, I got some capacity, boss. You need to give me another project or two. And that's the kind of person I want to hire. If I'm not seeing that, it's either because I am overloading these people or they aren't hungry, as the term we use.
And you're going to see that in person, or you're going to see that from a remote perspective, really in the same.
Right.
So let's talk more practically about, systems and process that you've seen that have worked well in the remote world with your clients. So what are people doing to do a better job at goal setting and holding people accountable and distributing work and monitoring work carefully? That's kind of what we all want to do in the remote world, but imagine what you've seen is some people do it better than others. But what are things that work, in your experience?
Yeah, some of the very basic things that work are things along the lines of a scorecard. The same kinds of what I call stand-up meetings where you have like a 5 or 10 minute meeting with your team, and this can be over Zoom or Teams or Slack. It can be whatever it is you use for your communication tool and your collaboration tool. And the idea is, okay, what are you working on? What are your roadblocks? What do I, as a manager, need to do to help you clear the road in front of you so you can get your work done? What are you working on right now? Are you busy? All the good tools that we used to use in the office, we now use on Slack or we now use on Teams. It's not a problem. So whatever you were doing to make yourself feel comfortable that you had your hand around the task that your team was working on and that you were making headway to your goals, and getting a heads up that, hey, I'm running into a problem and I can't get my work done. All of that is still applicable, and you still have to do it. Just because my worker is remote makes no difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, we use a lot of scorecards here and those kind of check-in meetings and one-on-one meetings. But I found that in the remote world, you have to structure that much more clearly. It was back in the day, I might say, hey, let's have a sales meeting every week and everybody talk about their forecast. And I'm going to, go on sales calls with you and we get all this chit chat time in the car and you can see how you perform in the meetings. If we don't have all of that, I've got to have much more clear processes. I've got to have a meeting schedule for a one-on-one check-in. I've got to have a scorecard set up. I've got to get reporting. It forces people to get much more structured, at least me to get much more structured than I might have been if I could just experience life and work with you when I'm next to you. So do you see companies investing more in those processes and systems, or have the better companies always had all that all along and they just move it seamlessly into the remote world?
Yeah, you just actually nailed it. The companies that were doing it right had the scorecards, had all the KPIs, had all the measurements, had their dashboards, whatever they were tracking. They had those and were using them when everybody was in the office. And all they did was simply transfer that good practice to make it available to the remote worker. And like I said, whatever collaboration tool they're using, it's available there and more visible to the rest of the team. Because usually, unless you're doing some specific one-on-one work with a particular employee, it's more visible than it might have been, because you stop and think about it. Somebody was always traveling and they had a good excuse for traveling. I had to go see a client. Well, now we say, no, you have to be online. And by the way, your camera has to be on. So I want to see you just like I would see you if you were in the office.
Yeah. And that camera on, I found, is a key thing. Every meeting we have, our cameras are on. And I find that, even when clients say, I don't want to have my client camera on, I'm like, we always have ours on, because it just makes it easier to see everybody's present and alert. And, at least they look like they're engaged. One of the other processes that we've had to work hard on, and I just wonder if you've seen this with your other clients, is on resource planning. So, in the past, you could kind of walk around the office and see if people were busy and not busy, as what we're talking about. But we spend a huge amount of time like planning the hours that we allocate to each person by skill set. We think about how we're proposing different skills and how many hours we have available. And it's a very complicated system, and we're a relatively small agency doing all that. Are you seeing your clients go through that level of detail in employee work planning so they know what everybody's doing, what the capacity is, or are they still taking some of those old systems and just kind of throwing them out there and see how much people can get done?
Well, the ones that are complaining that it's not the same, working from home, this is not good. I'm going to try to find some way to get everybody back in the office. They're the ones that aren't stepping up and doing, in my opinion, this is my opinion, what they should have been doing all along, even when we were in the office, which is having a really good, tight set of, how do I know what the workload is? Did you used to use, Microsoft Project, for example, to load your people in with their skill set, just like you would if you were running a manufacturing floor and putting all the equipment in and what that capacity is? Were you doing that before? Well, it's no different now. It's really no different now. And if you think about your comment about, I assume now you have clients that are across the country, right?
Yeah.
For your firm?
Yeah.
And so if you have a salesperson out here in California, did you travel out to go with me to visit some of my clients to make sure I was on board with what we had for capacity and what I was selling for you is the right thing? Well, you're still going to do that, even though I no longer come to the office and I'm working remote. You still want to fly out here and work with me.
Yeah. Do you think, in terms of managers, do you think this is an age thing? I hate to say that as an older guy, but do you think people our age are having a harder time with this because this is the way we always worked? And people who kind of grew up in the digital age are like, what's the big deal? I'm still working the same way. And let me just add one other observation on that. I kind of noticed my kids, I have four children and they're in their 20s right now. And I kind of noticed that in school, especially like in college, you kind of go through college and it's almost all remote work, right? You're in class 15 hours a week, but you've got like 40 hours of homework that you got to do if you're going to be successful in that week to just make it through to get your tests and quizzes. So they're all used to remote work. Show up for an hour in class, but then you got all this remote. So you kind of go from that environment of total remote work, and then you go to your job, and you're like, wow, I only have to show up for in the office, 8 hours, and I'm done. It's kind of a shock, to a lot of people. So I don't know. Do you think that the students who kind of grew up through the digital world and are used to doing all that remote work in high school and college are just better suited to that, or can you teach these old people new tricks?
So I guess I'll answer. Well, first, can you guarantee me that the national HR people aren't going to see this when I say, yeah, the old people have a problem? Um,
Not at
yeah,
all.
the older the boomers, unless they're people that have been in the technology world all the time, that in their careers, um, they do have a hard time understanding how to manage people if they can't see them. It's just it blows their mind. They can't wrap their arms around that. So yeah, I think there are age issues. When you watch the young, and I deal with young people in the undergraduate school out here at one of the universities. Um, uh, Almost every semester I'm involved with them, and they don't they don't understand having to be at a certain place at a certain time just for work. They understand if you make an appointment to see somebody, you have to be there and you have to be on time. They get that part. But they don't get, wait a minute, why do I need to be in the office at 8 o'clock and then leave the office and go see somebody at 10 o'clock and then come back to the office? This makes no sense. The work I need to do, I don't need to be in the office to do it. They do it on their phone. Maybe some of them use a laptop, but most of them just simply use their phone. That's their office. And so they get it very quickly. And if you try to tie them down to say, be in the office, that's not going to go over very well with them. I mean, they may do it if they have no choice, if they need the job, but you're not going to have a happy employee. So, yeah, I see there being an age issue for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot to learn for us. We're running out of time, Dave. I just want to talk about one more issue related to this, and that's around core values. One of our core values at Nowspeed is trust and respect. And I think that helped us through this transition, kind of when, from moving from a time when we could see everybody working to remote, I had to kind of remind myself that, look, our core value is trust and respect. I have to trust you that you're going to be doing the job and working. I've got, systems to monitor that. I've got systems to see the work product. I've got scorecards. I've got all of that in place. But ultimately, I'm not looking over your shoulder every second, and I have to trust and respect you that you're gonna be you're gonna do your job, even though I can't see what you're doing. Is this some of this a lack of kind of core value alignment between maybe the corporation and the managers and the managers and the employees? And that we don't really walk the talk that we're putting out there in our core value statements. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Uh, okay, so the answer is I feel you pretty much nailed it. And I think it's also true that the leadership team is not necessarily living out what they state as are their values and their core values. I have yet to see a set of corporate core values that didn't have trust and that one of the values. But I define trust a little bit differently than the average person uses that word. See, trust for me is that I get that you have my best interest at heart, not just your own.
Mm.
And then you translate that to, I have the team's best interest at heart, not just my own. And then further up the line, I have the company's best interest at heart, not just my own. Now, you have to have your own best interest at heart. Let's face it, there's no such thing as pure altruism. It just isn't there. So with that definition of trust, I separate out the other issues that you defined as being competencies and dependability. So I may trust you, meaning I believe you have the company's best interest at heart and my best interest at heart and the team's best interest at heart. However, I may have an issue with your competency, either because I didn't train you properly or because I thought you had that competency and you don't have it, or you have a dependability problem. You just don't see time in the way I see time. So when I say, hey, we have an 8 o'clock meeting and you show up at 10 past 8, that's fine by your way of thinking. Not so fine by my way of thinking of dependability. But it has nothing to do with trusting you. The reason I separate that out is because as a manager, I want to be able to have a discussion with you that you're not dependable and have you understand that I'm coming from having your best interest at heart. The reason we're having this discussion is I believe it's best for you that we have this discussion. Not because I've got some rigid view of dependability necessarily, right? So by separating those things out and having trust only be what are your true intentions? What is it that you have? What interest do you have at the top? And if it's not the team and it's not the company and it's only feathering your own nest, doing what's best for you and damn the other people, we have to have a really serious conversation because you're not living up to trust at that point. That's a core value. And if we can't trust you, you can't be on the team.
Wow. That is so well said, Dave. I think you just outlined an entire framework for management that is probably just missing in every management training course that I've ever seen.
And that's why I always start with trust.
Yeah, but separating out trust from competency and dependability, and I'm sure you could go deeper on that as well, is so insightful because sometimes the employee says, hey, you trust me. Why even looking at the work that I'm doing? No, you're looking at it in a nuanced, dependable way, deeper way that is in the employee's best interest because you want to help them be successful. And that's it comes from that genuine side, and that's where maybe the respect comes in. Wow, it feels like we could have an entire other conversation about that management philosophy, but it feels like you can do that in the online world or in the in-person world equally the same, right?
Totally. Although I will say you probably have to work a little bit harder with the remote worker in the feeling part of this, understanding where your intentions are. There's another part of this. I don't want to go down into the rabbit hole, but there's another part of this that comes from the military, which is part of the trust thing, but it's also part of where your loyalty is, right? And you have to be loyal to the team you're on, not the team you lead. And so we kind of messed that up a little bit in the corporate world because as the VP of operations, I feel like I have to protect my operations people first and foremost. But no, you're on the C-suite team, and that's the team you're on, and that's the team you're loyal to. So if we have to do something for the betterment of the company, that isn't necessarily the best thing for operations, I have to accept that that's what I have to do for the team I'm on, not the team I lead.
Yeah, that's a very important concept. I wish you told me that 30 years ago. There was a particular situation that would have helped me in, but that's another story. Wow, Dave, this has been a really good conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. Very important insights. So thank you again. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about your work with Vistage or CEO coaching, how would they do that?
Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn, so look for me there. You could go to my website, which is DBK Associates, my initials, associates.com. So you can find me there, or same website, execleadercoach.com. Same way you can find me there.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for taking the time, Dave. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, David. It's a pleasure and an honor.